Thank you. And please, if you have questions as I'm going, just raise your hand and stop me. Otherwise, I'll keep talking. I have a lot of slides, and they're mostly pictures. And I will try to time it so that there's plenty of time at the end for questions. So I'm going to talk about design serving people, subtitled Innovation Through Co-Creation. And I want to start by providing a couple different perspectives on sort of the background or the context for this work. And one is the pattern that I've seen. I've been practicing in design research at the front end for over 30 years. And when I started, it's always been design serving people, but originally it was more focused on designing for people and looking at people as individuals. And that's changed. Well, I'll tell you about my background. I've been working with designers in the design process in practice for my career, but my training is in anthropology and psychology. And I was hired as an experiment in an industrial design firm in the early 80s. So I think you'll see reflected in my work this focus on people and bringing all kinds of people, not just designers, into the front end of the design and development process. But having worked with designers for so long, I took a lot of lessons from watching them work. And in essence, I've taken how designers think and communicate with each other, transformed it in a way so that I could have non-designers using similar, not identical, but very similar tools. So basically what I've been doing is working on a language that any person can use to become to take part in the very, very earliest stages of the design and development process. And I'm primarily there talking about the part of the process where you're trying to figure out what to design. Okay, so it's not yet been determined. This sometimes takes forever. Okay. Yeah. So I'm not worried yet. So the early part of the process, as it's called, the fuzzy front end, where you're conducting design research, participatory activities in order to figure out, well, what is it that needs to be designed, or what is it that people need in order to live better. And so a lot of what I'm doing then is exploring a language that non-designers can use in order to take part in that directly. Now I'm getting worried. Okay, so let me recreate some of the upfront diagrams, and then hopefully we can get it booted back up again at some point, because I literally had nearly 100 slides, all of them photographs, to show you. So it's really hard to convey it without the pictures. So where I wanted to start was just talking about the context of how design serving people has been changing over the last 30 years. And so what I'm describing there is a pattern where initially what we were doing was designing for people, and we were looking at people as individuals. And you look at a number of different individuals, put the information together, and you could be saying that you're doing user-centered design, designing for them. What's happening now is more and more activity is going towards designing with people. And we're looking at ways of involving people directly in the design process, not only as individuals, but as collective, as collective units. So we're looking at groups or teams or communities or whatever. And so one change was this shift. Not going away from designing for, but in addition to designing for, we're designing with, we're looking at individuals, and we're looking at collectives. Then I described a project that I was engaged in recently. This was for the US Army, and they hired a number of people to research what was going on in terms of research on creativity and strategic thinking. So I thought that was intriguing, and that that's the organization looking, but it was a good opportunity to go and look at the literature on creativity, something that I hadn't done in a number of years, to see what was going on, to see what was known and what was not known. And so basically what became really clear was almost all of the literature just looked at creativity as, and then this, let's say this represents the idea. Nearly all of the research on creativity is about ideas that come out of heads. Okay, it's all about cognitive processes, and it's pretty much about individuals. Okay, so most of the research, and in fact most of the research is about creativity coming out of the heads of particularly creative people, not just people in general. But it became clear that there were some other layers of research that were not as robust as that, but there were other layers of research about creativity appearing. And so one, and this isn't per se, this isn't a model of creativity, this is just a framework that holds what we know about models or theories of creativity. So there's some literature then about the role of emotion in creativity. So creativity is influenced by emotions and the heart and how we feel, and that when you're in a positive emotional state, creativity can be increased. There's also just beginning literature on creativity as influenced by movement of the body. So especially if you look at sort of front-end innovation and look at it more from what design researchers are looking at than creativity researchers per se, there's starting to be some exploration of improvisation as playing a role in idea generation, innovation activities. So there's starting to be a recognition that not only does creativity take time and take place over time, but creativity can be facilitated by the body, the people moving in time using their entire body in space. Okay, so this is, I don't know that there's solid scientific rigorous data here, but there is starting to be some interest in exploring that. So enactment and improvisation as tools for innovation. And even beyond that, there's another level of the framework, which is the role of the environment in fostering or facilitating creativity. And there is some literature there from architecture and interior space, looking at the size of the room, the height of the ceiling, the amount of natural light, and that sort of thing. So there are some connections there between the environment and creativity. And you can also look at the environment in terms of the space itself, but you can also look at the tools and the materials that are available for the people in the space as potentially influencing or facilitating creativity as well. And so these would be white walls, movable furniture, other sorts of attributes as well. And so even though this is sort of the core of what's gone on in creativity research, I think the framework points out the need or the possibility for many other layers of research in creativity. So this is a picture of individual creativity at various levels. When you think about collective creativity, there's, you could imagine a number of these different individuals interacting in some form. One example would be brainstorming, whereby each individual generates ideas, and sometimes those ideas collide with other ideas and new ideas emerge. So brainstorming is one sort of example of collective creativity. And the one that I'm interested in exploring is one that's a different form of collective creativity, where instead of the individuals bouncing ideas off of one another, there's more of there's either a physical or an emotional or a time-based connection between the people, such that the idea is a great big idea that they collectively contribute to. So instead of a large number of individual ideas that you might get from brainstorming, a lot of very small ideas, the model here was attempting to show that collective creativity can be having all those people working together either through the space, the materials, the mood, or whatever, to look at big ideas or to solve really, really big problems. And then if you have different kinds of people in this model, like people from different disciplines or people from different backgrounds, the potential for the idea then can be even larger because of the variety of perspectives that they bring to it. So I summarized the creativity literature by looking at what we know about individual creativity, good sound, what we know about collective creativity, and then sort of divided it off into sort of the social factors, the space factors, and the tools and materials, and concluded that we know a lot about individual creativity and how social factors of rewards and feedback, things like that, influence it. We know a lot about individual creativity and the role of space or environment, but we hardly know anything about any of the other cells. Okay, so there's not a lot published on individual creativity and the influence of tools and materials. And there's certainly hardly any research at all about collective creativity at any level. And so in my examples then, what I'm doing is focusing in on tools and materials, some of them for individuals, some of them for collective groups or communities, and giving examples of how I've been working there. What? Okay. Was that not my computer that made that song?
It's getting closer.
Gosh. Okay. Question?
So when you say materials, are you referring to, like, examples you use whiteboard, physical things? Or are you also referring to, like, information?
Both. I'm referring to, whiteboard, and then maybe information or forms, things that are given to them to work with or to work through. And that's what all the pictures show, which are on my computer. and so one other diagram I had then in the setup was just to describe, say, in the design and development process, where if you take this, so this is activity over time, and this would be the point at which the idea becomes clear. Like at this point, after this initial exploration and then this wandering around, you'll then determine the idea, what it is that you plan to design. This point in time would indicate, say, product release, or when you move into the building that's been designed. Either one. And so I'm referring to this as the generative phase, where the focus is on generating ideas, this being more of an evaluative phase. So you have the idea, it's being prototyped iteratively, you're getting feedback on it. This would then be post-design, which is a phase, although I think that traditionally the design process started with the idea. Like when I first got into the field, the process started here with the RFP from the client saying this is what we want to do. And it basically ended, even sometimes before it was released, it ended when the drawings were done. So you would go through the design process and then you would start over and do another one. So the generative phase is a newer development. And in fact, the post-design and the pre-design phases, I would say are also should be considered parts of the design and development process. I remember I used to, a long time ago, I included those in the model, and people would look at me like I was nuts. Like, why would you have a phase after you're done? And why would you have a phase before you start? But I think what's happened now, and the reason they looked at me like I was nuts, was that there was no time, there was no budget, there weren't any efficient means of finding out what happens after something is released. But of course now we have all kinds of ways to figure that out. And we can do it cheaply and easily online and so forth. So adding the post-design and the pre-design phase makes sense these days. And if you think about it, it's really one big circle. Because the post-design phase ultimately then leads into a pre-design phase of the next. Yay! What did you guys do? You don't know? Okay. Okay, so is it? Okay, so you know what I'll do? I'll show you the prettier pictures without talking. And then we'll go right to the examples. Thank you. Whoa. But I want to show the pretty pictures, yeah. Okay? So, here's the first pattern, moving towards designing with people in a collective sense. And then the layers of creativity, brainstorming, collective creativity, where somehow the people are touching to form a collective unit. I forgot this. Oh, no, I didn't. Transdisciplinarity, then, is a form of collective creativity that's even more powerful because the people in it are so much different from one another. So here's the 6-cell thing with the activity in only 2 cells at this point in time. And here's where my slides will focus on both individual creativity and collective creativity as it's influenced by the tools and the materials and the techniques. And so what I'm doing here is just explaining that this is the part of the design process that my examples come from. They could be applied in other places, but the nature of my consulting work and teaching is more there. So just to keep that in mind. And so how is it that we work this way in the front end? And there's a really simple framework. And that's that we involve people, including non-designers, or primarily non-designers. We involve them in the front end of the design process by asking them to make things, enact future scenarios, and tell stories about what they've made, or to tell stories about the scenario. So you notice that there's no beginning. I mean, you can start at any point and you can go in any direction, but the point about the framework is that you're iteratively making, telling, and enacting, and telling, and enacting, and making, and that the participatory activity is a practice of all of those things. And so the key then is how to facilitate and enable those. So what I'm going to do now is go through examples, a lot of pictures of the telling, the enacting, and the making. And here you can see that in telling works through the whole process. It takes a different form. I mean, it's done for a different purpose at different points in the process. And this list is just a list of what's been published about the telling tools and techniques. So if you were to look on websites and blogs and really, dig into what people are selling in terms of front-end design research, the list would be much longer. But there's actually publications in peer-reviewed journals on all of these things. So just a couple of examples here. So card sort. Sorting the cards and categorizing them and naming the categories is a form of telling. Open-ended workbooks, telling. So telling involves responding through the use of language, whether it's verbal or written. Here, this is sort of a making telling where they've taken pictures of their typical day, and the telling is done through the annotation of the photos. In this example, Zach has made something, but he needs to tell us about it so that we understand what his intent was in the making. So the telling invariably will follow the making. And in this case as well, we have a making, a telling, and an enacting, because the team here that's made up of architects and planners, as well as the people on the hospital who are a part of the new hospital committee, have spent the morning coming up with a scenario about the ideal patient and family experience 8 years in the future. So it'll be 8 years before the doors of the new hospital open. So they're telling the story, but you'll notice that she's in scrubs. So they're not just telling it, they're enacting it. They chose to act the roles, as opposed to just narrate the story. In terms of enacting, again, there's a different sort of purpose for between the really early end enacting and the later enacting. And again, there's a long list of techniques here. And these are all, again, from peer-reviewed journals. And some of my examples, I've learned a lot from Scandinavian design researchers, particularly in the participatory design community here, because this is the form that they have developed, and this is sort of how they've approached the practice of making, telling, and enacting is through enacting. And on this project, it was a government-sponsored project to explore trash handling in Copenhagen. They're able to get people, such as on the left, the shop owner, out of the store in the middle of the day, in the middle of winter, enacting future scenarios on the sidewalk. And on the other side, we have the store owner and a shopper, again, involved on the spur of the moment there in future scenarios in the context of use. But then you find out that all of this was carefully practiced and staged and practiced with dolls ahead of time. So it's actually more planned than it would initially appear. But again, they're pretending future stories. They're enacting, acting out how things could work and not work in the future. An example from a dissertation that was done in Sweden, where the author of the dissertation did something like 18 different workshops, all involving the use of technology to facilitate the lives of people with different kinds of disabilities. This is not an actor. This participant has some kind of learning disability where he compulsively buys everything when he shops. I don't know what the name of the disability is, but he can't control himself. And so he's play acting a scenario where the thing in his ear is giving him feedback about what not to do, for example. In my practice, I've not been bold enough to ask people to act or pretend in full scenarios, but I have started practicing with having people use puppets as a means of telling stories about the future. And it's worked really well. I've given people the option of choosing puppets or choosing another method, thinking that not everybody would be happy telling future stories through puppets. And so this is a project we did exploring the unmet needs and dreams of people with type 2 diabetes. And it was just a wonderful tool for the really extroverted people and their wives who just happened to be home when we were there to do the research, which was interesting. These are puppets in Madrid, and with a colleague, we presented a workshop where it was a learning by doing future scenario puppet-driven learning experience. And I do have to say the puppets went over really well in Spain. Now here are my undergraduate industrial designers realizing that the box they chose to explore contained puppets. Okay, so I think you can see from their faces they're like feeling like they picked the wrong box. But they were given 10 minutes to use the contents of the box and come up with a future scenario having to do with communication. And after the initial disappointment, they did it. In 10 minutes, they had a really effective and really funny scenario. But sometimes it's the simplest props that are the best. And so you see here just a simple matter of pipe cleaners. And this is a different team exploring future scenarios of communication. In a larger workshop, we had a visiting professor from Schwäbisch Gmünd, Germany, who got on a team and they picked the box of acting props to act out future scenarios. And you can see for certain people, the enacting is the ideal experience for creatively using the whole body to imagine and enact future scenarios. Peter is enacting. He's an elderly female American consumer who watches too much television, keeps the heat in her house too high, and eats Fritos all day. So this is his scenario. This is his sort of current scenario, and then she has a change of mind, and he acts all that out as well. These are enactment scenarios. I've spent a lot of time working with architects in healthcare design. And you'll see here the room is made out of particle board. So this is a really rough mock-up of a hospital room. And the reason it's been mocked up is it's a different size and shape than normal. And so people on the project team, people in the hospital weren't sure that it would work. So the people in the picture are all nurses playing roles. So they're playing the roles of the nurse, the doctor, the patient, and they're basically usability testing the room by enacting scenarios use. And what happened is that part went so well and so quickly that they seized the opportunity to critique all of what architects would consider details of, where is the sink, where is the hand hygiene materials, and that sort of thing. So again, a really interesting lesson in the power of the materials and the ability of people to enact in the future. In terms of making, again, there's a list of tools and techniques. Sometimes they're two-dimensional paper-based tools for, in this case, exploring my gaming experience, past, present, and future. A different paper-based toolkit. So the making materials are usually very carefully selected for a particular content area, and there'll be a different set of tools for exploring past memories versus exploring current situations and feelings versus exploring future scenarios. And generally, in the making situation, we start by having people explore thoughts and feelings and attitudes about the current situation. Then we invite them to go to the past and explore memories and feelings, and then jump into the future. The reason we do that is to make sure that when they get to the future, all of these little ideas in their head are activated and are ready for connection through the tools and materials. So this is a fourth grade teacher's map of the ideal school year. The top is school, the bottom is home. Here we have a mom making a timeline of having to do with the paper towel experience. This is Procter Gamble. Here we have people making hypothetical paper towel packages in order to understand the product. So we're not interested in the package per se, we're interested in what they want the product to be. Okay, so the Make tool is getting at that. This is a collective situation. So it's the same idea, a very carefully selected toolkit of parts, visual and verbal, that people then collectively construct. And this is a hospital example, and the middle is defined as the most important part. And so a team of people has had to come to an agreement on what goes in the middle to represent the future experience of patients and family members at that hospital. So even the discussion about what goes in the middle and what doesn't go in the middle is absolutely crucial and informative. Again, each toolkit is conceived for a particular use. Here we're asking nurses to jump out into the future and come up with ideas for the ideal flow of tools and material and supplies on a floor of a hospital. Okay, so we don't want them laying out the hall and the rooms. We want them thinking about the flow of things, which the toolkit enables them to do. You notice here there's a huge amount of annotation. We gave them a toolkit. We spent some time coming up with all the right words for the toolkit. They looked at it, threw it down, because they didn't need it. They knew all the words, and they knew them better than we did in this case. Again, other hospital projects, these are former patients from a heart hospital given the opportunity to imagine the ideal patient room. And you notice here quite a lot of annotation as well. And the hearts are, after each pair of people presented, the others in the room voted on the good ideas. So Larry and Joyce got a lot of the votes of other people on their good ideas. Now see, one advantage here of carefully selecting the tools and the materials is we can then conduct the same study with, in this case, patients, nurses, doctors, family members. So we can analyze all this and look for similarities and differences across the different stakeholder groups. Everybody's given the same materials, but invariably they'll do something different with those materials. Again, student projects where we have the opportunity to explore new kinds of toolkits and new uses of materials. I have a very, very large three-dimensional toolkit where the basic forms are all covered with Velcro, and all the, so the gray pieces are all Velcro, and they can Velcro to each other, and all the little gizmos then are backed with Velcro so that people can really, really, really quickly create three-dimensional expressions of needs and dreams. So here you have father and son hardcore gamer reimagining a Microsoft controller through Velcro. And here you have a participant at the end of a session. So she's done a collage about her home experience today. She's thought about her past experiences. She's made a map of her ideal situation. And then in the very last 10 minutes, she's asked to use the Velcro to come up with something that will help her to realize the dreams that she's expressed. And she does that really quickly, and when she presents it, she's explaining to us what it does for her and how it makes her feel. So this isn't like a prototype of an object, but it's a visual artifact, an expression of her dreams for the future. And she can tell you sometimes, well, a lot of times it takes longer for them to explain it than it does for them to make it. Because once they make it, it starts, you know, the interface becomes clear, and they can go on and on about what it does. Here's the Velcro modeling used in a collective situation. This is one of those ideal making, telling, and enacting all rolled into one, because we have designers, practitioners, and academics, as well as healthcare people, all teaming together using Velcro to come up with mobile technology, which, because we're in a hospital, they can then demonstrate their new technology ideas by play acting future scenarios in real hospital settings. And so that is incredibly powerful, to be able to have the environment that seems real, have the right kind of people on the team, so it's not just stupid future scenarios, but real future scenarios, and then to move the body in that form of creativity as well. Again, just many examples. The Velcro can be used for just about anything. This is a student group was really suspicious about the Velcro, and they wanted to study collaboration. So they said, okay, well, we're going to try the Velcro and see if that works, but it did. They tried it on themselves, and there's some just real interesting ideas that emerge just by playing and touching and interacting with the physical things, such as the self-reflection mirror and so forth. So they were surprised at how many ideas were generated simply because they, collectively played with the tools and the materials. This is all Velcro. This is a client project where there was the budget to mock up a bus cab full scale and allow different stakeholders to come in and modify it. Real-time, full scale. This was an interesting, I went to GE Appliances this summer and did a 2-day workshop, bringing all the different kinds of tools and techniques, including just plain blocks. And one of the teams grabbed the blocks and the dolls and the Velcro and created this sort of impromptu toolkit that was ideal for thinking through ideas for the home a home with a family having small children where there's one big great room where everything happens, including cooking. So it's just surprising in that how rough the tools can be and still work. This is a toolkit that I've used in the architectural firm. It's called the Dollhouse Toolkit. You see that the scale is all based around these little purchased dolls. And some of the components then are purchased, such as the toilets, the sinks, and some lights and things like that. Because in any patient room, there's certain things that you have to have, sinks and toilets and so forth. But going to the previous slide, most of the components are generic and abstract and deliberately simple, simple enough to take on many, many different kinds of meanings. So this was, the three women in the slide before worked in the same hospital. They worked on different floors, so they had never actually worked together. I think they might have seen each other in the lunchroom, and that was the most they had ever interacted. They came to the session. They shared their thoughts and feelings about the current patient floors. Again, they were all on different patient floors. And then when given the opportunity to design the ideal patient room, they constructed this collaboratively in 11 minutes, which I thought was incredibly fast. They cheated. So the architects had, that rectangle to work with, but they slipped the bathroom in out of bounds before I could, it was all there. By the time I noticed it, it was 2 minutes. So, sorry, we just let it go. But an amazing, and this was a case where it took them longer to present all the ideas than it took to make the ideas. Here, a different team of nurses said, well, we think the patient rooms are okay, but our nursing station is really poor. Can we do our nursing station instead? And I said, fine, and they did. And here you can see the power of the ambiguous shapes. They were able to construct everything that they needed to share with us, including sinks. I guess they ran out of sink. The other team got the sinks or whatever. But notice they carefully labeled everything just to make sure that we didn't misinterpret what they were doing. Lego Serious Play is another tool that you can purchase and use. Here my students are using it to get preschool teachers to rethink their preschool. This was a toolkit for a client exploring hand hygiene behavior in public places, such as public restrooms, as well as in healthcare settings. And so this was one where we had absolutely no idea what to put in the toolkit, so we put everything in we could think of. And here you can see how they've used the physical space of the focus group facility and the simple shapes to mock up a bathroom. There's the sink and the mirror. And I can't tell you how it works, but you could tell from their faces that it was a really, really good idea, what they came up with. Not my work, but another full-scale, full-body technique here. At the University of Dundee, they were exploring their future design department curriculum over the next 10 years. So what they did is map the timeline on a very, very long hall so that instead of just writing on a whiteboard and sketching diagrammatically, when they talked about 10 years in the future, they had to walk all the way down the hall and to really feel it and to think about it and so forth. And then a final example, I have a student who is using sand play as a generative design tool. So you see here, it's one of those ideal, it supports playing, enacting, and telling. So you play with the pieces, you enact future stories, and you tell about how you feel, or you tell how things are gonna work out in the future. So she's a very, very powerful tool. She did realize that it's not exactly portable. You know, like if you're doing research around the country, it would be a problem. So she's got a virtual version. And now what she's doing is running participants in this version and the virtual version and seeing what are the advantages and disadvantages of each. And so this is a summary then of the making, the telling, and the enacting. And I have a short case, but I think what we'll do is take questions instead.
So what kinds of things are you trying to look for and measure as you play with these different tools that people use in terms of the process of the product comes out that leads into the later phases? What things are you kind of tracking and looking at that comes out of it, the changes? Like numbers of ideas, speed of ideas, quality of ideas,
Well,
resolution of conflicts?
these projects are in practice for clients. So they're looking for innovation. They're looking for human-centered innovation. So generally, what we're doing is trying to, you know what I mean? We're here, we're working here with our client, trying to figure out what this really, what this idea is.
Right.
So it isn't, you know what I mean? It's all for the marketplace, so to speak.
Right, I'm saying when you're looking at the ideas that come out, and you're saying, I mean, for instance, what kinds of tools, for instance, you give them a predefined abstract tool set. Have you, when you're trying to experiment with different kinds of those, what do you look at in terms of what happens when people do it, in terms of the innovativeness of the idea, the usability of it later on, the ability of people to understand what the point was of things, stuff like that, to feed into the process of using that innovation. I'm not getting too much.
No, I guess
So
just,
the toolkit is successful.
how do we know if it's successful? I think that I guess I'm looking more at if people are really immersed in the session and they're really enthusiastic about what they're doing and they stay a half an hour longer than they're paid to stay. You know what I mean? If they're excited about what they're doing, then that is successful. But another part of the success then is that whoever's going to be working on the design of the space or whatever, it's not successful unless they've been a part of the planning and the watching of what's going on. And we can do the best research, but if, you know what I mean, getting over to the design part, you know, we need to involve them as well. So I would say that in terms of like knowing, you know, how to make a toolkit and all that, it's just something that's evolved over time. But none of it's been scientifically or systematically studied in that way. It's all been through client work. Yeah. So usually in a group setting, it'll start as individuals. Like they might have done a workbook ahead of time, but initially it'll all be individuals talking to each other. Later, usually when we're working towards the future, we'll want to put them in teams so that they collaborate. We let them pick who they want to team with, usually. So if they have somebody across the table and they think that they're just like an idiot or whatever, they know that, and they'll avoid them. They'll choose not to work with each other. So we're usually real flexible about how we team them up. And keep in mind, in the client work, the people are getting paid for their time. Not in the hospital work; those are all volunteers. But you know, people have come; they're on their good behavior, they're getting paid, and they usually work pretty well together. If it's a requirement to put those two together, one thing that I've done in the past is maybe have them separately do their thing, videotape it, and then show both of them videotapes of both of them. So, you know, like expose them to each other's different ideas. I think a lot of times, though, it's the atmosphere and the preparation and all that. We don't have too many instances where people can't get along. And I've only had one instance where people didn't want to participate, you know, where they thought, well, this is childish, I don't want to do this. That's only happened once. But we we figured out how to get them involved. So people are usually pretty good because they're kind of curious because it's so different.
Have you experimented at all with tolerances for abstraction? So
Yeah.
in terms of A, who uses certain levels of abstraction, and B, like for specific scenarios of ideation, what level of abstraction is effective?
Yeah, I have experimented with that to some degree, but you can only do so much of that when the client is paying. But I found that asking even highly creative people to write in a blank book, it's a white book with a white cover and white pages, that was like over the border. They couldn't even start. You know, so they have to have something. Generally what we do is we have varied levels of abstraction within any given toolkit. So we have like the really abstract stuff will give you the most output, but you have to have low-hanging fruit, like really low-hanging fruit to get people into it. So we, you know, there's an art in making the toolkit so that you have that.
And part B of that question is, for your users, do you have individual users who are uncomfortable with a level of abstraction and choose not to participate?
No, we usually, you know, we've got the toolkit part down such that we've had people with an image collage toolkit that exhaust all the words and then finally go find some pictures. So we have had people, you know, uncomfortable, say, with pictures, but they eventually get around to them. The only time we had like a mutiny, it was in the hospital, the Ideal Hospital room. It was like this guy with the Harley Davidson t-shirt. He's like, I didn't come here to make stuff. I came here to critique the architectural plans, okay, because we were working with the architect. So he had in mind that he was going to be a critic of the drawings. And he came and we were asking him to glue stuff on paper. And so that didn't go over too well, but some of the women in the group bossed him around and sat him down and made him work. So it worked out really well. And then he apologized at the end. Yeah, but no, we haven't. If you make a good toolkit, that you should be able to give everybody something to feel really comfortable with.
Sounds like you put a lot into creating these toolkits.
Yeah.
How did you finally narrow down what's a good toolkit and then deciding which toolkit to use depending on the situation?
That's a big question. And, you know, actually, I co-wrote a book that's out soon. It took a whole book to answer that question. You know, because it's, the toolkits look deceptively easy, but there is a lot that goes into the creation of one. I'd say the best way to learn is you learn by starting small and practicing. And you make a toolkit and you see, oh, nobody ever used these things. Well, maybe I shouldn't have put those in the toolkit. So it's there are some rules, there's some patterns there. There is a process, but like I said, it takes a couple chapters just to explain that. Yeah, sorry. And then to analyze, that's a big chapter. Mm-hmm.
Sort of wondering, where within your toolkit do you have any support for or structure around direct observation when they do in the helping people who are the actual art involved in design, whether they're watching people, in the practice before or watching how people use these things that they're building. How do you support them in watching?
How do you mean if they've never done it before?
Yeah.
How do you get them to do it in the first?
Sort of, how do you get them to build empathy and sort of these tools for reflection? It seems like that's part of what you're doing. How do you teach them to watch it process, or do you?
Wait, who are we teaching? The participants?
Yeah, your participants, because they're the experts in here, right? So you have
Yes,
founders and
yes,
nurses in here.
yeah.
Do you teach them also to sort of be a bit more introspective and look back at what they're doing and why they're doing it?
I would say the nurses are already inclined in that way. that they can speak for the other stakeholders. I would say that is something I'd want to do, but in practice, have not really had the opportunity to stay involved consistently enough to do that. You know what I mean? Because it's all an issue of, you know, time and money and staying involved with them. Now there have been some hospital projects where on small hospitals, the same group and its nurses have been involved throughout. And then they've started not only to do it themselves, but to call, you know, it's like it's their idea, it's their design. And so the ownership, you know what I mean? If you can get them involved and they sense that ownership, then that really does start to happen. But I have to say it only occurs like intuitively at this point with certain groups more than others.
That sort of came up with the question with that about different groups
Mm-hmm.
and sort of how you, what types of structure you provide them to develop it.
Well, if it's an issue of hierarchy, sometimes we have to separate them. But sometimes we deliberately put them together because you put people at a table with all these pictures and the hierarchy goes away. Everybody's like, what are we doing? You know, and it's such an unusual activity. And it's always sort of fast and time constrained. So in some of those situations, the hierarchy doesn't matter as much. It's just like, uh-oh, we better start working faster. Or you divide them up and you have them compete with each other. That works too. So then they're not fighting within their group. You know what I mean? They're looking over to see if they're ahead of the other guys. But if it gets really bad, what we do is we separate them. We give them, and we've done this before, give them the exact same tools and materials and process. We videotape the whole thing, and then we expose them to each other. And whenever we've done that, they've been more similar than different. And then they're shocked at like why they've been arguing for so long. You know, especially when you look at, we did that with the Ideal. 2 different hospital groups had argued for 3 years, separated them and exposed them to each other, and it was like, oh, we do want the same thing, don't we? So you just have to come up, you know what I mean, sense the situation and then try to get a little bit tricky. Uh-huh.
You suggested that the pre-design process doesn't get like enough emphasis. What would you suggest gets done during that process?
I think using the technology that we have now to just start watching and tracking and observing people. You know what I mean? Using the tools to automatically see, you know, what people are doing with products and services. But see, 10 years ago, we you know what I mean? It was like hugely expensive to even propose that to clients. Let's go see what they're doing with your products today. It was like, no, we can't do that. We can't afford it.